our great-great-grandfather. And William Clayton was Joseph Smith's good friend, personal scribe in the Nauvoo era of the church. So William Clayton didn't come to the church and into like Joseph's life until they were in Nauvoo. And people would really like relate Joseph and William together, like they would refer to them as Jonathan and David. What was really hard for me about the temple ceremony is that my brother had told me, several times that the temple ceremony is really a knockoff or a plagiarism of the Masonic ceremony. And that was too hard for me to believe. I'd actually heard that on my mission too, but there had to be an answer, right? Joseph Smith must have been guided to some truth within Masonry. But I couldn't really figure it out without experiencing it myself. Just like I told you, I had to go swim in the lake Loch Ness to really see if there's a monster there. So I became a Mason. I became the top level Mason you can in a Blue Lodge, and actually had a position I was voted into called senior deacon. And I can show you some of that regalia later that I brought here, but So like while I'm going through that, the whole time I'm going through the Masonic ceremony, and I want to tell this story because my daughter Samara is very disturbed that I'm a Mason. And I thought it was maybe because she, thinks it's like Kurt thinks it's conspiratorial, right? No, it's because it's misogynistic. My daughter's pretty progressive, like little girl, 13 years old. She does not like the idea that her dad belongs to an organization that only men can belong to. Right. And I've tried to explain to Samara like over and over, and so here's my chance to explain it. At the time when I did that, I needed to understand why is there a connection between the Mormon temple endowment and Masonry? And I needed to pick it apart and see what parts of it were in the Mormon temple ceremony, which parts weren't. What was Joseph Smith really trying to do? And for years, I spent, I'm sorry to say, like years trying to figure out, okay, these signs and tokens that are exactly the signs and tokens in the Masonic ceremony, maybe they were Christian at some point, and the Masons got it somehow, right? And so I had spent a lot of time like making sense of every detail of the temple ceremony and understanding and maybe even making up in my head that these Masonic symbols were also of ancient origin, of Christian origin somehow. Jesus was teaching Masonry, which is that's partly what we teach, is that when Jesus, so just so you know, an early leader in the church in the early 20th century, James E. Talmage, taught that when Jesus came back and preached for 40 days, and that he taught all of the Mormon stuff. We don't have any of that documents or evidence, but that's what we believed, right? So he's teaching the temple ceremony. Anyway, and what was interesting is that, year after year, my kids are getting older. They're having they're not having good experiences in church. My daughter, for example, made fun of Donald Trump when he was first elected president. Her Sunday school teachers, who are huge Trump supporters, got mad at her, lectured her in church about what a good man Donald Trump is, right? So just these weird things that my kids are struggling with. And I'm like, what? Just get over it, Samara. That's just them. It's, it's how they love Trump, right? Who doesn't in conservative Utah? So and we don't fit that, right? It's not that we're super liberal, but we're certainly not super conservative. And so we just weren't really fitting in, but that your faith should be stronger than that, right? So I would like push them to go to church. But the thing is that I didn't like going to church. And so I had a calling in the church. My position at that time was a high counselor. So the church is run by 12 apostles and a first presidency. And the first presidency is 3 men, the president and the first and second counselor, and then a layer of 12 apostles underneath that 3. That model is replicated in various geographic areas within the church. They're called stakes. So you have a stake president that's kind of like the prophet for that area. Not really the prophet, but that's the model. And he has 2 counselors, first and second counselor, and a council of 12. Sorry. And the council of 12 is a high council. And I was one of those 12. And so it's a pretty significant position. And I really liked it because I could do more of the things that I wanted to do in the church. So I didn't have to go sit in normal church with my kids because I didn't like it either. And I think part of it is just because it was so useless. Like, you're going to church, you're hearing people talk about how Jesus helped them find their wedding ring or prompted them not to fall off a cliff, or, but you're not hearing, or you're in a Sunday school class where some mother believes that we should be spanking and hitting our kids, and whatever happened we're too woke now, we don't spank, right? I mean, just bullshit, really. Like, there's nothing about like what you read in the New Testament being taught. And so anyway, it just wasn't working, but I had ways to like subvert it and stay active, but I made my kids and my wife go. But here's like probably where breaking points started to happen, Derek. Like, I told you about my experience with the temple and how I had really like anchored my belief and testimony in this ceremony. And I like studied the hell out of Masonry. I understood every part of it, as well as the Mormon endowment, the history of the Mormon endowment. And so I loved it. That was just a big part of my testimony and part of my membership. Mm-hmm. And when we got a new prophet, when our previous prophet, Thomas S. Monson, died, Russell M. Nelson was the new president, and it just happens through succession. Whoever is the senior apostle becomes the next president. So he becomes the president and makes sweeping changes in the church. He reduces our church time from 3 hours to 2 hours, which we're all excited about, right? Making things easier, really, and doing some things that I felt like were progressive. Exciting time. And then he changed the temple ceremony. And in the temple ceremony, when I first went through, we literally are set apart to become kings and queens, gods and goddesses, priests and priestesses in the life hereafter, right? It's the whole concept of, and I think there are several different scholars that you've interviewed that talk about kind of the idea of, is it apotheosis? Apotheosis.
Yeah.
So kind of that. And that's part of what's like, you have this potential with your wife to be a god, but in that ceremony, you make a covenant to obey God, and she makes a covenant to obey you as you obey God, right? So it's her pathway to God is through me and through a man, right? And I didn't like that, but I never thought about it. I never asked women what they thought about that, except my mom didn't like it. She was vocal about that. But anyway, so that changed in the temple ceremony when President Nelson came in. And I remember going to that ceremony and really being excited that now she makes a covenant directly with Jehovah, not through her husband, but directly, right? And she can become a goddess and a priestess without me, right? And so that's cool, right? But then other changes in the ceremony happened. The way that we put our robes on, the way we do handshakes, standing up, sitting down, pieces were pulled out. Pieces that I thought were foundational to, because I had so much time studying Masonry and connecting it to Mormonism and the Mormon temple. And it shook me. Those changes shook me. And so the next Sunday, in the Mormon church, you're taught to go and bear your testimony in front of everybody, and that will strengthen your testimony. So I decided to do that because I needed to like bolster my testimony, because that was kind of shaky for me. And what I wanted to say to the congregation, and remember, I'm a high counselor, so in some ways, like, I outrank I mean, not technically, I mean, the bishop is still presiding over his congregation, but like in the structure, I outrank him. But I'm going to go and stand in front of the congregation and bear my testimony. Every fast Sunday we do this, right? Anybody can stand up. It's open mic. And what I wanted to say is that I spent too much time on one aspect of the gospel, the temple, and making it work in my mind, resolving the conflicts that I had. And that's kind of like anchoring in just one thing. You should anchor in many things. So that was my intention. So I go up there and I start by saying there have been changes to the temple ceremony. And this is kind of how it impacted my testimony. I was anchoring too much in some aspects. And in the middle of me talking, the bishop stands up and stops me. And which is very odd, right? In our church, like you can stand up and say the most batshit crazy things in testimony meeting, and you rarely are stopped by the bishop. And he whispers to me and he's like, you cannot talk about the changes to the temple ceremony. And I was totally taken off guard. I didn't know what to do or to say. I just ended my testimony. I got out of there. The funny thing is that it had already been in the Salt Lake Tribune that the church temple ceremony had changed to be more favorable toward women. So and I didn't know this. I just like left, but my dad at the end of the meeting, like went up onto the podium and started to like take down the bishop. He's like, you just like, what do you think you're doing? You're so arrogant. So my dad's kind of like this honey badger that will defend his kids. Right. And he's a little, Welsh guy, but he will take out the bishop, and that, but that experience was strange for me. It was more important for that bishop to stop. Like I had a good message of like, how do you stay in this church when there's constant change, when the history's really kind of bullshit, when stuff is hidden over and over again, and then we find out about it, right?
And you're somebody who legitimately over the years have been accumulating this evidence and data and realizing, look, if I'm going to keep the next person to be faithful to the truth that I know is true in your mind, even though you have to deal with these issues, I have to give them something so they know that this is the way. And yet I feel you. I can relate to what you're saying with my own experience when I'm being disciplined, and not even like, here's evidence, against your position. It was more just, this is heresy, this is wrong, that kind of thing. And the way it was confronting me, I did not feel comfortable, and it was very rude, and I never attended and then was excommunicated. And I went wherever I needed to go, which was not there anymore. But anyway, I'm just throwing it out there as the thing. But you weren't even trying to be like that. You were trying to be like for the truth and help.
I was warning people to not do what I did and anchor in just one part of the gospel. This is the exact kind of thing that any bishop would want said in their congregation. Don't anchor on one part of the gospel, because if you do, if it's on Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon, it can very quickly fall apart because there's problems with every part. But if you're anchored in several parts, you're going to withstand the winds of change, right? That's what I was trying to say. Not just for the congregation, but for myself. The one person I'm probably trying to save and keep from leaving is me. And the opposite occurred, right? Like it did feel like a disciplinary action, right? In front of the entire congregation. And the thing is, Derek, is that I have been nothing but true and faithful to this church like my entire life. Paying tithing, no smoking, no drinking, no, carousing. Like I've been faithful to my wife, faithful father to my kids. I mean, model citizen in the Mormon church. I'm not the one that you'd want to lose in the Mormon church, I don't think, right? Or my family.